forestry-related issues. So, to begin with, just can I get a bit of an outline of sort of the scale and the extent of the work that's currently being undertaken in the Department on forests and forest-related issues?
Yes, Senator, there's a range of activities. I think you're aware we've got reviews of regional forestry agreements underway in Tasmania, commencing in Victoria, commencing in New South Wales and underway in Western Australia. We're also completing an analysis of the KPMG report into the operation of the illegal logging regulations, and we expect to complete that shortly, and then we're going to go through the regulatory impact statement process. While we're doing that, we're also trying to implement that legislation, so we're continuing to work on country-specific guidelines. We've still got people from our compliance area looking at imports as they come into the country. We're working with the Forest Industry Advisory Council on consultations with industry players around Australia on the report that was released a few months ago on future directions for the forest industry relating to things like R&D, hubs around forestry, higher value adding to timber products and those sorts of activities. I think that...
National Institute.
Oh yes, there's an election commitment for a National Institute for Forest Research, and we've been holding discussions with the Forest Products Association, the relevant R&D Corporation, and having some meetings with industry about how that might be implemented in accordance with the timeline of the election commitment, which should see, we hope, new R&D activities in South Australia and Tasmania underway in the next, within this financial year. Oh yes, yeah, there is one other. The Senator's reminded me. The one that I actually think is very important, since I get hay fever too. We're implementing the mechanical fuel reduction trial, which is aimed at reducing fire hazard in sort of closely settled areas where smokes are a human health and hazard, and also around sensitive ecological areas. So we're trialling that in New South Wales.
Few things, but on that one in particular, so where is that one currently at?
Michelle Lauder might be able to provide it, but I think it's the trials have agreed are about to commence in New South Wales.
So Michelle Lauder, Assistant Secretary of Forestry. So the contracts have all been let. So there's 3 trials happening across the country. So they're being managed by New South Wales Government Forests. So there's a trial on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, one in East Gippsland in Victoria, and one in southwest of Western Australia. We also have 4 consultants collecting data and monitoring some of this work, and that includes a study of community acceptance of mechanical fuel reduction, which will be delivered by the University of Canberra. The cost-benefit analysis will be delivered by GHG. Mechanical feasibility study will be delivered by the University of the Sunshine Coast, and the modelling of the trial's impact on fire risk across the landscape will be delivered by CSIRO.
Okay, is there, how about research into the impact of the trial on the biological impact of it on the forest ecology?
Yes, absolutely. So all of the trials, so the 3 trials will be monitored for a range of things, including the impact on the environmental values, as well as the impact on
But is there a particular study looking at the impact on the ecological values?
Yes, it's part of it. So the trial design, so each of the trials will be a minimum of 120 hectares, and they will be looking at, so they'll be comprising of 10 hectare replicates, which will be looking at machine-only trials, fire-only, fire and machine, and then a control to be able to compare them all. And then there's going to be pre-treatment and post-treatment assessments of biomass and biodiversity.
Over what period of time are those?
Over the contract. So the The trials are starting spring this year, so in the next month, basically, if they haven't already started, and they plan to be completed by within 18 months, depending on this summer's fire season, because a lot of the staff doing the trials will be fighting fires if we've got any big fires this season.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the overall suite of work that you're doing, I asked, I think it was in the February estimates, Mr Thompson, as to whether there was particular work focused on plantation forestry compared with native forestry, native forestry, and whether there were any programs that the department had particularly focused on facilitating and encouraging plantation forestry. And I think at that stage you said there weren't any in particular and referred me to the Forest and Wood Products Association. So is that still the case now?
That would essentially be the answer, in that particular areas of research related to forestry. I'd refer you to the Forest and Wood Products Corporation, who undertaking research in the plantations area and native forest area. But the Forest Industry Advisory Council report, some of the work that's being discussed there, and the report is public, but it relates to a couple of things. One is, insofar as it relates both to plantation and native forestry, it's about improving the reporting around forest management and demonstrating their credentials as forest managers. But in much of the work related to value-added forest products and bioproducts from forestry material, a lot of that does actually relate to plantation. Cross-laminated timber and that sort of stuff is going to be predominantly pine products. Mm-hmm. And so they're focusing work around that.
Right. And how many staff altogether working in forests and forestry and forest products?
In the department?
In the department, yes.
In the department we have currently 30 people working on forestry.
Right.
In the branch,
And
including NRM Futures.
Oh, that includes NRM Futures?
Yeah, so 20.
Oh, so it'd be 20.
20, okay.
I thought the number was a bit high.
And what proportion of those would be working predominantly on native forest-based issues and others, predominantly on plantation, or are they all a mix?
They're all a mix. There's a group working on regional forest agreements and those sorts of
How
activities.
many working on the regional forest agreements?
Approximately 10, but
half.
that's a guess off the top of my head.
Yep.
So it's about half the branch then working on,
Yes.
on regional forest agreements.
And then there'd be how
Some
many
of
on
them are also
international?
working on other things, though.
Right.
So of that 10, some are working on the RFAs as well as the FIAC report and that consultation, and the National Institute.
And there'd be, I think, 5 people working on the in the forestry branch on the international activity.
Right.
And plantations work, well, it's some of the same people who are also doing RFA work. It probably amounts to about 2 FTE. Yeah.
2 FTE on plantations, okay. Thank you. So on the regional forest agreements, so can you give me an update as to where they're at with regard to each state? You said WA as well now, as well as Victoria and Tasmania.
Yes, that's exactly right. So in Western Australia, we're undertaking a review of the last 5 years of the RFA. So the scoping agreement has been signed between the two departments, and the public consultation document, so looking at the implementation over the last 5 years and what's been achieved and what needs improvement, has been prepared by officials in both departments. We will be providing that up to ministers shortly and seeking to go out public for consultation for between 4 and 6 weeks before we hit Christmas.
Right, and then appointing the independent reviewer.
Yes, that's exactly
that
right.
process.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
And then completing the review.
So the expectation is you'd have the independent reviewer appointed early next year?
That's
then?
exactly right. Yes.
Right, and when would you expect that person's their review to be completed?
My understanding is potentially 3 to 4 months after they're appointed.
Okay, that would be very quick if that's the case.
It is, but
compared with previous experience.
It will be impacted on how many submissions come from the public consultation process and the number of documents.
I expect you'll have a lot.
Yes, I think possibly that may be the case.
Okay. So the Victorian, where are things
So
at
the
with
Victorian,
the Victorian?
we've signed a scoping agreement again for their next review of their RFAs, and we have been working with officials to prepare that implementation plan that would be used for the public consultation. There's no timing that's been agreed for the public consultation yet. As you would be aware, the Victorian Government are currently working through their forest industry task force,
yep.
and so they're being careful as to not to confuse the public about too many consultations on forest-related issues.
So what is the planned timing then compared with the task force activities?
So at the moment, the task force is planning on reporting by November this year, and so the plan would be, if that goes to plan, that we would consult potentially early next year. We were trying to avoid the Christmas and January break if we can, so it could be early next year, but it does depend on the task force reporting.
And that would be
time.
consulting on the scope again at that stage.
It'd be reporting on, so the consultation we would be doing would be looking at the last 10 years, because there's 10 years of reviews Victoria need to deliver, and then from there we would look at the future and potential extensions.
And are you looking at all of the Victorian RFAs together or separately?
No, we're doing them one by one in the review, because there's different issues in different regions.
And so are you going to begin the process for all of them, or are we just beginning the process with one of them?
So we've started with East Gippsland because that's the one that terminates the soonest. So we have been focusing purely on East Gippsland at this stage. So Central Highlands is the next one, but that's 13 months beyond the East Gippsland timeframe.
Now, the East Gippsland 20-year timetable is up, as I'm sure you know, in February next year, isn't
Yes,
it? So
yes.
you're obviously not going to have a new RFA in place by
No,
then.
that's right.
What's the currently considered will happen?
So the
given
Victorian Minister has written to us seeking a short-term extension of the East Gippsland RFA. The extension would be 12, 13 months, just to align it with the Central Highlands RFA, with the idea that the extension process could happen for both of them.
So you would look at both the RFA, the Central Highlands and the East Gippsland ones together
Yes. Yeah.
and with the aim of completing them by March 2018?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So Tasmania?
Tasmania. So the third five-yearly review has been completed, and we've had the independent report and the government response. So that's all signed, sealed and delivered, and was tabled in Parliament, as you'd be aware, on the 12th of September. So now the parties are negotiating to extend the agreement. So we're in the process of negotiating what will be in that. We are also planning some further public consultation. So in the review public consultation, we sought views and feedback on the potential extension, but we're going to do further consultation so that people who didn't realise there was an opportunity for consultation on the extension at that time can still have their say. So we're meeting with Tasmania early next week and planning on consultation starting in November.
So what would be the time frame then of signing a new agreement, given that consultation process that you've got going?
So I haven't got firm dates, but we're looking for in the first quarter of 2017 if we can. But as you can imagine, it's not just our decision. Tasmania needs to be in agreement with us. Tasmania's RFA terminates at the end of 2017, so there's the time isn't the thing pressuring us to go forward.
Right. So you expect that even with this consultation process on the new RFA, you will have sufficient time to implement a new one by the time the Tasmanian one expires?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Minister, in February, I sort of quoted to you some of the concerns about the regional forest agreements, and in particular how threatened species are still, over the last 20 years, the regional forest agreements have been in decline and sliding towards extinction. And in response, what you said that, obviously the Tasmanian, you said that Obviously, the report, i.e. the Tasmanian RFA report, informs what the new RFA will look like, and therefore the issues that you have raised to your question will inform what the RFA looks like. Yes, so we've got, and I quoted to you some quotes from the independent reviewer, including that, judging the overall success of threatened species management and broader biodiversity outcomes under the RFA is difficult given the limited monitoring of outcomes, that there's a need for sufficiently powerful assessments that will detect differences that matter in terms of the populations of key species groups. And assessment of the overall outcomes of the RFA for the conservation of biodiversity requires a greater commitment to appropriate research and assessment in both the Car reserves and wood production forests. So I'm interested to know, what do you see changing in the new RFAs that's going to make the situation different from as it has been in the last 20 years, which demonstrably has not been a good 20 years for forest species, in particular many of the species that have become more threatened and indeed critically endangered.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's certainly, Senator Rice, the whole process of review is the mechanism by which you work out what's been working and what hasn't been working. Now, I take there was quite an amount of advice that was provided through the review process that made recommendations of things that could be improved in the new RFA. But one of the most important things that, and the reason that we have gone out for extended consultation, is to give the community of Tasmania, in this particular instance, the opportunity for them to have their say about the issues that were raised in part of that review, and what it's likely to look going forward. I'd also note that the Victorian government's current committee that's looking, not the review committee, the one...
Forest Industry Task Force.
The Forest Industry Task Force is actually looking to the future so that they can have a look at what they would like their agreements to look like in the future, as well as taking into account the reviews of issues that have happened in the past. So, I mean, obviously, I don't think anything's changed from my answer that I gave to you in February, and that is that the issues that are raised as part of these reviews must form the basis of the decision-making process about amendments into the new RFAs to make sure that the RFAs are going to serve the best interests of the community going forward.
But what I'm interested in is sort of what's being considered in terms of extra mechanisms. I mean, two of in the government's response to the independent reviewer's report, it was pretty wishy-washy and certainly didn't give me confidence that things were going to change.
Sorry?
I said it was pretty wishy-washy and didn't give me confidence that things were going to change. I mean, two of the key responses were that the state agrees to consider implementing a statewide forest monitoring information system, and that, it does say that the parties are committed to protecting and improving the conservation of Tasmania's threatened species and will continue to work together in the development and implementation of conservation advices and recovery plans. But in terms of actual concrete, measures and mechanisms that were going to mean that we're in a different era compared to what we have been in the last 20 years, there was nothing that was committed to in those responses to the independent reviewer. So I'm wondering, I mean, is there plans for extra funding for research to undertake the monitoring that obviously hasn't been occurring well enough over the last 20 years? Are there extra programs? Is there a plan for substantially increased reserves? What sort of things are being considered in this new regional forest agreement?
Senator, Ms Lauder might be able to provide some information there, but in the context of the comments made by the reviewer and the government's response, that refers to the whole areas under forest in the RFA areas, not just the production forests. So some of the decisions about where money is going to be spent and where it's going to come from, it actually relates to expenditures by Parks and Wildlife Services, Environment Departments, as well as Forestry Departments. So further work's got to go on to sort some of that through. The forestry operations have an impact on threatened species, as do other activities. So fire management becomes one of the important ones, and fires aren't just unique to production forests, they also occur in national parks. And I think the track record of things like fires in forests is actually a bit better than the track record in national parks.
Yes, I agree with you, but if you read the threatened species recovery plan, such as the one that's just been finished for the tiger quoll or for the draft plan for the giant Tasmanian lobster, they focus on that the key threatening process in those examples and in many other forest species is the impact of logging operations. That's identified as being these are the threatening processes. So what I want to know is, what's going to change? How can we have any confidence that these species aren't just going to continue to slide into extinction? Because that's what's happening at the moment. Swift parrots have gone from being endangered to critically endangered. Leadbeater's possums have gone from being endangered to critically endangered. What's going to change so that you have confidence, I have confidence, we all have confidence that these precious animals are going to continue to exist?
Part of the extension of the RFA process is reviewing a lot of the documents and reviews that have been done and looking at data that is out there in other sources, and that's one of the things we will be consulting on as well. And we are working very closely with the Tasmanian Government, but the Department of the Environment and Energy in the Commonwealth, and one of the things that they are looking at is the key threatened species that you are mentioning, and how they have how their recovery plans have been implemented, or what has been gaps, etc., over this period, and then looking at what needs to be done to ensure that they don't slip further, or their populations can be improved in the next 20 years. That's something that the Department of the Environment is actively looking at as part of this process.
I mean, the bottom line is, are there plans to, be protecting more areas of forest than we currently have protected? Because we know that the clearfell logging operations, they kill these animals. And they're increasingly smaller populations. I mean, that's the simple equation.
Senator Rice, your points are noted, but we are just a little bit too early before we can give you those definitive answers, because there is a process that's still being undertaken, and part of that process is consultation. Until we finish that process, it would be premature for us to say this is definitively what we're going to do. However, I'm assuming you've read the government's response to
yes,
it.
I was just quoting from it.
Yeah, so, you obviously...
And it's the government's response, as I say, it gives me no confidence whatsoever that anything's going to change.
Well,
it's full of not just weasel words, it's full of, huge... no, I'm trying very hard not to.
Some questions and everyone will draw their input.
Huge gaps that you can drive, tractors and logging trucks through.
Well, Senator Rice, you and I have to agree to disagree. I think the government's response from both the Tasmanian government and the federal government has shown great consideration for the issues that were raised as part of the review. We will continue to consult, and we will not prematurely make statements until that consultation is finished, but I'm very confident that responses of both the federal government and the Tasmanian government have recognised the issues that you've raised.
Okay, one final question. The announcement last week from the Tasmanian government of considering opening up logging in the 400,000 hectares of forest that was logging was deferred in until 2020. What's the Commonwealth's response to that?
Well, obviously that is a statement that was made by the Tasmanian minister. It in no way reflects one way or the other on the federal government. You should perhaps take that up with the Tasmanian minister.
It certainly has been taken up. So the federal government doesn't have a view?
You'll never.
Well, we've certainly passed no comment on that whatsoever. I mean, we're dealing with the RFA and the recommendations of the review.
Does it impact your negotiations over the RFA?
Well, I'm not going to state one way or the other. However, as I say, if you have an issue with it, and I'm sure you have, taken it up with Minister Barnett.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator.